is the histograms. We have to have a title. We'll call this the percentage histogram. And again, I'm making this generic, but you really should talk about utility bills or people's age, whatever the situation happens to be. Then we have the x-axis label, which is besides the numbers here. Let's say we're talking about using the example in the book, 80 to 100, 100 to 120, 120 to 140, 140 to 160. This happens to be, I think, utility bills. And the title says something about bills over here. And then we have the y-axis, which tells you how many people are found in every category. This is the percentage of people, the percentage of bills if you're talking about utility bills. And again, the numbers might be 10%, 20%, 30%, whatever the numbers are. I'm not going to use the exact numbers, but just use the basic framework of that particular problem. And then you make a bar. If you've got to be, so this is the y-axis label. And you don't write the word y-axis label on it. You write the actual label. And you write the label, you don't bother writing. But you need to have those three things if you're going to do this on paper. I'm not sure if you're going to on the online version. And the third thing is the title. But that's the ancillary material. The main thing is the graph itself. So for example, the first category might be as high as 7%. You make a bar as high as 7% between 80 and 100. The second bar might be as high as 20%. And again, these are not the same numbers in the book. The third might be over here. And the next one might be over here. And of course, they got to add up to 100% because we calculate everybody's count in which different categories. Now the question is, how do you convert this into a polygon? Well, it turns out you do one thing which is simple, then you do a second thing which is a little more complicated. The first thing is you make a dot as high as each bar, right in the middle of each bar. Okay, and then you get rid of the original bars. So instead of having a bar representing how many people are found in a category, you have a dot, and then you connect the dots in order to make them more visible. And finally, that's the easy part, I think. The hard part is what do you do with the stuff? How do you bring it down to the axis here? How do you bring it down to here? And the rule, which is straightforward, I mean, we spent a lot of time explaining why the rule works, but the final rule is you create, remember this is right above the 150, right? 140, 150, right in the middle. You create another interval. I call it a phantom interval because it's not really existing. 180. And what's the middle of that interval? That got to be 170. So you bring it down here. The answer is you bring it down to the middle of the next interval. And likewise the other side. The one between here is 60 to 80. In between is a 70. So you take this first dot and you bring it down to the 70. And you're done. Okay, is that clear? That clarifies hopefully the issue of how to make a polygon and at the same time the histogram. Any other questions about chapter? That was chapter 2, I believe, and then we have chapter 3, which is the mean, median, and mode stuff. We can go over some of that, Laura.
I had a question about if they give you, all right, well, this is the question. It says the value for a set of data varies from 11.6 to 97.8. If these values are grouped into 9 classes, indicate the boundaries.
Okay, does that show up in the book or online?
In the book.
Oh, really? Okay, good. If it's online, I have a problem. I won't be asking you that on the test. On the test, I told you, this is true, everyone should be aware of this, the challenge of these histograms and polygons and ogives is to come up with the boundaries. Is it 80 to 100? Maybe it should be 80 to 90, 90 to 100, 100 to 110. That's always a challenge. There's no real great formula to solve the problem. So with common sense, experience, trial and error, all those things, so until you finally get a reasonable answer. There's no perfect answer. Whatever is reasonable. You wouldn't want to do 80 to 81, 81 to 82. That's a little crazy. You don't want to do 80 to 140. I mean, you're going to make the right number of boundaries, the right number of categories. So on the test, I'm not going to ask you to make the boundaries. I'm going to tell you use 80 to 90. I'll tell you use 5 to 10, 10 to 15. You'll be set for that. For the online stuff, if that might appear, I don't notice it, but if that appears in the question, you should let me know. And hopefully I won't ask you that on the test. Or if I do it, we'll just mark it right or something, because I can adjust the material. Okay, what's next? Yes, Aditya. I'm sorry, your turn. Three. Okay, good. I want to move on to, you want to be chapter 3 as well?
No, this is chapter 2.
Okay, let's go back. Let's stay on chapter 2 for a second. Yes.
And I'm still confused on how to do the ogive.
Okay, the ogive, which I'm not, okay, the ogive is the same as the polygon, meaning a bunch of dots that you're going to connect. Yeah. The only difference is instead of dealing with the second of the 4 columns, the percentage column, now you're dealing with, again, unfortunately we don't have an example on the board, we're dealing with the 4th column, which is the cumulative. Cumulative. So it's always going to be a graphing, a polygon of the cumulative percentage distribution. So an ogive is a combination of a polygon applied to the cumulative frequency, the percentage frequency distribution. And the only difference is, instead of making a dot in the middle of the interval, you make it at the end of the interval, because we're accumulating up until that. We're accumulating up until that point. Like, how many are below 100? How many are below 120? How many are below 140? So the dots will be shifted over to above each interval. So if you will, in this case, shifted over by 10, because it is right. So the dots are so the dots that you're reading off on the fourth column, you know, 0%, 20%, 30, are written at the right of the interval. That's the first thing to know about. And the second thing to know about, when you get your last dot up here, remember, they're getting higher and higher. So when you get to your last dot, once you reach 100%, you don't bring it down to the bottom. That would make no sense. You keep it at 100%, because once you reach 100%, you're not going to have any. It stays at 100%. Like, how many people paid less than $300 in utility? Everybody paid less than $300, so it's 100%. And the only last challenge is what do you do with the first dot? So just the first dot's going to be at the end of the interval. So again, the first dot, which is right here. Again, the first dot is 80 to 100. So the first dot starts here. What do you do with that very first dot? And the answer is you don't bring it down here. You don't bring it down here. You bring it down to the beginning of the first interval. Different than the polygon. The polygon, we had to go to the phantom interval to the left of that, which we're not using for some reason, which I told you for extra credit to figure out the reason for. For the polygon, for the ogive, we have a slightly more simplistic. We bring the first dot down to the beginning of the first interval, which is a very simple rule. The only question is, why are we allowed to be so simple for the ogive, but we were not allowed to be so simple for the polygon? That was extra credit. If anybody thinks of the reason, let me know and I'll give you credit for it. And if anybody gives up and is just curious, I'll be glad to tell you this. But you got to show some interest, and I'll give you the answer.